Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap here in beautiful Paris for a phone camera comparison. We've got the brand new Huawei P30 Pro versus the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. I want to find out which is best for photos, videos, low light, selfies, slow-mo. Hope you're not walking into anyone here. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Alright, so before we start, I should say that none of the photos or videos have been edited in any way, shape or form. Both the P30 Pro's Master AI and the S10 Plus's Scene Optimizer are enabled throughout this video. And of course, all my opinions are my own, so if you agree or if you disagree, let me know what you think in the comments below. So let's kick off by looking at the different lenses. Both phones come with an ultra-wide, a wide, and a telephoto zoom lens. Starting with the ultra-wide, we obviously get loads in the scene on both phones, and then moving on to the main lens, the wide lens, and straight away photos from both look excellent. There are subtle differences in brightness and color. On the S10, if you look at the grass on the left and the color of the Eiffel Tower, the colors are just a little bit warmer compared to the P30 Pro. But this is where things get interesting as we move on to the telephoto lenses. And on the P30 Pro, we get a 5x optical zoom versus a 2x optical zoom on the S10 Plus. But a 2x optical zoom is where the S10 Plus maxes out, whereas a P30 Pro can go up to a 10x hybrid zoom. And if I match that on the S10 Plus with a 10x digital zoom, well, just look at the difference. And if we actually crop in this 10x zoom by 300%, you get a real idea of the difference in sharpness and detail between the zooms on the P30 Pro and the S10 Plus. That really is a significant difference. Let's move on to another example, again starting with the ultra-wide lens. And even though they both have f2.2 apertures, the P30 Pro's is a fair bit brighter. Moving up to the wide lens, they both look really good, although again you can see a difference in the color temperatures between them. The stone building on the S10 definitely has slightly warmer hues to it. Then we've got the 5x optical on the P30 and the 2x optical on the S10. As I say, the S10 maxes out there, whereas we can then go to a 10x hybrid on the P30 Pro. So if you're looking for that creep mode, as Marques Brownlee called it, then, well, the P30 Pro is the way to go. But for the sake of comparison, if we do match the zoom with the S10 at a 10x digital versus the P30's 10x hybrid, again, it's just a night and day difference. The P30 Pro really does have the best camera zoom I've ever seen on a smartphone. But now let's look at the quality of each lens individually, and starting with the ultra-wide, again, the P30 Pro's is a fair bit brighter overall. But just look how much better exposed the Eiffel Tower is and the people in the foreground. It's a much more pleasing photo on the P30, I think. Onto the primary wide lens, and it feels like they swapped around a little bit. The S10 Plus is overall a bit brighter than the P30 Pro, although again I do quite like that more contrasty look. Moving on, and again the first thing that strikes me here are the colors on the S10's photo, which really do pop. They're a lot more vibrant versus the P30 Pro. Which is more natural? Well, honestly, it's probably somewhere between the two. Cropping in by 300%, and in some of the finer details, say on the back of the bench, we can make out that's a dark green versus just the crushed black on the S10 Plus. Moving on to some portrait shots, and it really is a striking difference between these two photos. My eyes are initially drawn to the much more contrasty, shadowy look of the P30 Pro, which also has a slightly stronger bokeh look. It's not as evenly exposed as the S10 Plus, and also there seems to be a weird moire pattern on my shirt on the P30, which the S10 doesn't suffer from. On to the next one, and again, the difference is pretty striking. Even though the S10 Plus is a bit brighter, better exposed, and more evenly lit, again, my eye is kind of drawn to the P30 Pro. I mean, just look at the color difference between my actual black jeans on the P30 versus that kind of washed out grey look of the S10 Plus, and my shirt looks much more realistic on the P30. So I realize I'm kind of going back and forth here, but for this particular photo, I do think I prefer the P30, even though, as I say, the S10 looks a bit better exposed overall. Now, this third portrait shot is harder to call. So far, I think it's 1-1, but for this one, I'm kind of siding with the S10 Plus. The colors on my face are more natural. Again, we've got that much darker, slightly orangier, shadowy, contrasty look of the P30, which honestly, I really do like both of them, but for this particular shot, I think the S10 Plus wins. Switching to the front camera for a quick selfie, and while I do like the slightly brighter and more natural colors of the S10, there's definitely more detail in my face on the P30, and that's obviously down to the higher resolution 32 megapixel selfie camera versus 10 megapixels on the S10 Plus. But it does look kind of like the P30 has a filter on it or something. It's definitely darker if you look at the difference in the blue sky at the top. So overall, I think I'm leaning to the S10 Plus here. It is very sunny here today in Paris, but with the Eiffel Tower behind me, this is a quick test of the front-facing selfie cameras. Now, in terms of pure resolution, the S10 Plus does, oh, that is bright. The S10 Plus does have an advantage in that it can actually shoot 4K 30 with the front selfie camera. Right now, this is shot at 1080p on both, but now I've switched to 4K 60 on the S10 Plus, so tell me if you can see much of a difference in terms of quality and sharpness and detail. I think I am preferring the dynamic range and the colors of the S10 though. Alright, so first up we've got 1080p on both phones with the S10 Plus in Super Steady mode, so this is the most stable video you'll be able to get from these devices. Alright, so switching up to 4K, we lose that Super Steady on the S10 Plus, but according to Huawei, we do now have AIS plus OIS for super smooth 4K 30 video on the P30 Pro. Although remember, the Huawei can't shoot 4K 60, which the S10 Plus can. And in terms of video quality, well, you guys tell me, and also microphone. So hopefully one sounds better than the other, and you can tell me which in the comments below. A quick look at some slow motion video, and starting at 240 FPS, well, the S10 Plus just blows the P30 Pro out of the water. And then if we go up to super slow motion, 960 FPS, well, one of them looks pretty good and the other one looks absolutely terrible. So if slow motion is important to you, that's a pretty easy win for the S10 Plus. I just wanted to squeeze in this quick focusing test, and you can see with the S10's dual pixel autofocus, the transition is much smoother, whereas the P30 Pro, the focus just kind of pops between subjects. Let's get back to some photos, and now the sun has gone down in Paris, we can test the low light and night shots. So this picture of the Arc de Triomphe is taken with the primary wide lens in auto mode. Although if we then take it again on the P30 with its night mode enabled, you can see a significant difference. We now get a 6-second exposure from the P30, that's up from 4 seconds on the P20 last year, and while you can see a long exposure doesn't work well with moving subjects like the car, it's actually no better on the S10 Plus, but you get a much brighter and more evenly exposed photo. In fact, let me show you the difference between them. So both these shots are on the P30, but on the left we've got the night mode, whereas on the right it's just auto. And if you look at the tables on the right of the blackboard, you can see how that long exposure of the P30 just evens everything out, and it means we don't get those really bright highlights where we lose all that information. Night mode also seems to significantly increase the sharpness of the photo. For example, the tablecloth at the bottom right. So if we keep the P30's night mode shot and then bring in the S10's photo, well, I think it's a clear win for the Huawei. The S10 does seem to do a better job of handling the super bright highlights than the standard P30, but it can't compete with that long exposure night mode. And I'm not quite sure what's going on with the colors. The tables were not bright yellow like they appear on the S10. And you can see again the effect of night mode with these photos taken on the ultra-wide lens. We are still seeing that color temperature difference between the photos, which has been pretty consistent throughout, but the night mode shot does look nicer, it's brighter, and if you look at the headlights of the cars down the road straight ahead, well, you can actually make out some cars on the P30. On the S10, it's just a blown out mess. But now let's see how those telephoto lenses and the zoom works out in low light. So starting with the primary wide lens here, and then moving on to the 5x optical for the P30 and the 2x for the S10 Plus, already you can see a big difference in both the quality and of course also that level of zoom. But then look what happens when we go to a 10x hybrid on the P30 versus zooming into a 10x digital on the S10 Plus. Now obviously you would never do that on the S10 Plus, but if you want to match the zoom level on both, this is how they look versus each other, and it is an astonishing difference. The low light and the zoom of the P30 Pro are just unrivaled. Back in my pretty small hotel room, and again, the P30 Pro just looks so much nicer, especially when you do that night mode. Huawei has also been showing off the super high ISO you can now get on the P30 Pro, although I'm not particularly convinced. This is just a standard auto shot, although we got night mode on the P30 Pro. But if we just look at the P30 Pro, this is the same photo with 102,000 ISO, which is okay. I mean, it doesn't look good, but it is a very, very dark shot. But look what happens when we then go to the new 409,000 ISO. Yes, it lets much more light in, but the photo is completely unusable. No one in their right mind would use a 409,000 ISO. Moving on to a couple of low light selfie shots. You're probably sick to death of my face by now. The P30 is brighter, you can see much more on my coat for example, but I do overall prefer the look of the S10. This is a terrible photo. It's super low light, and well, they both look pretty bad. But between the two, I do think the S10 comes out on top. And again, in this photo, which is a rear portrait shot, I would go with the Galaxy S10 Plus. The P30 just has this kind of greeny look sometimes, which kind of makes me look a bit ill. And yeah, between these two, I would definitely go with the S10 Plus. As for low light video, well, these are both shot at 4K 30. They look pretty similar, although again, we can see that quite significant color difference between them. I would say the S10 Plus comes across as a bit unnaturally yellow sometimes. But when I start walking, look what happens to the P30 Pro. It's just a shaky, weird mess. Presumably that's the OIS not being able to cope with the low light. They both look pretty bad, to be honest, but between the two, because of that stabilization issue, I would go with the S10 Plus here. Okay, so that is the end of the comparison. We're nearly done, I promise. But I do want to mention a couple of quick features of each phone. On the S10, you do have the ability to change the level of background blur. So if you want a more subtle bokeh look, you can put it to say 3 out of 10, but if you want a really blurry background so your subject pops the most, then you can whack it up to 10 out of 10 blur. And you can change this dynamically after the photo is taken using the gallery app on the phone. But one thing I do like about the P30, on top of that crazy zoom lens and the awesome night mode, is you can actually switch from 10 megapixels to the full 40 megapixels in the camera settings. You can't zoom in when in 40 megapixel mode and it does restrict some other features, but if you do want a super high resolution shot, then it is nice to have that option. But the big question, which do you think came out on top? Let me know what you think in the comments below. For me, if I had to pick, I think I would probably go with the Huawei P30 Pro just because of that crazy zoom and the amazing night mode. Although generally I prefer the portraits and the selfie shots on the S10 Plus. If you want to see more photos and what I'm doing behind the scenes, then don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the TechJap. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time right here on the TechJap.